Hello, welcome to Game Design Essentials, Chapter 1, The Game Jam. My name is Robert Howard. I'm the author of Game Design Essentials, and I'm happy to be here to go over this lesson with you today. So, just briefly describing what a game jam is, just in case you don't know. So, this is an event usually gathers a group of game development enthusiasts together to make a game in a very short amount of time. AAA games, games that you buy in GameStop, they're going to take probably years to make, right? But a game jam might be a single weekend. These things can also be done individually, which is probably how you're going to be doing this game jam now. To make the game in a game jam, you need a game engine. So a game engine can handle the following things. Player input, rendering the graphics, audio, really anything the game needs to function. A game engine is going to do that for you. It's going to allow you as a game designer to author a game effectively. The way I like to think of a game engine, you think about Microsoft Word. What's Microsoft Word do? Well, you use that tool to make documents, to make Word files and PDFs and things. The game engine is like our Microsoft Word. It's what we're going to use to make a game, and when you're done, eventually, you can even use this tool to deploy the game on common platforms such as personal computers and game consoles. So there are some prerequisites here. I'm going to go ahead and assume that you already have the Unreal Engine installed. So if you do not, you can go to Epic Games and make that happen. And that you already have a project that has been created. And when you do create that project, you do want, if you want to follow along and do this lesson specifically, you do want the third person project template. And all the project defaults should be fine. I would not use starter content because that'll keep it sort of lightweight. It won't take much space on your hard drive. And once you do create this, it should open right to the third person example map. This is the map that we're going to use for this chapter. Now, once you do have Unreal open, we do have some kind of basics that we want to cover. And those basics are just how to get around in the engine. So let's go ahead and take a look. Now, as you can see here, this is actually the example project. So work has already been done in here, but no worries. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do all this stuff. So the first thing that you're going to want to note here is this right here. This is your viewport. This is your project preview window. You can even see the player character there, that funny looking mannequin fellow. And so immediately, probably the first thing you want to understand is how to move around the viewport. Now, if you're a gamer already, this is going to be quite easy. So if you play PC games, it's going to use those controls, which would be WASD and the mouse. That's primarily how you drive around. But to be specific, in order to look around, so if I move the mouse, you can just see the cursor moves here. If I hold down the right mouse button, I can look. You can sort of look up and down all around here. And then you move the viewport camera by using WASD. So W is going to move forward, S moves backwards, A goes to the left, and D goes to the right. That is our basic controls here. Now, one thing that's useful to know, assuming your mouse, most mice have these days, if you have a scroll wheel, the middle mouse button, that's going to determine how fast your camera moves. So if I scroll back on that scroll wheel, it's going to make the movement very slow. I'm just barely moving right now. I'm holding down the W key. I'm moving very slowly here. If I go forward on the mouse, it's going to go a little faster, 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 and then really fast, okay? So this is handy to know because sometimes you want to move the camera quickly, sometimes you want it to be very, very slow, right? So that's what that middle mouse wheel will do. And so you also have a selection of things. So you see these objects in the world. Even if you just have the example map open, there will be objects in the world by default. If you just click on them, all right, with the left mouse button, you're going to select those things. And so those selects, that button selects individual components in the world. Now, when you do select something, all right, notice that you do get this funny looking set of arrows here. This we call this a widget, by the way. Now, if you've ever used 3D software like 3D Studio Max or Maya or Blender or something like that, these are going to feel very familiar to you, these controls, this interface, because it is very similar to sort of 3D art asset creation tool sets. And so this widget here, this set of arrows, is how we move things around. So I can go ahead and click on this and move it around. If I left click and hold this arrow, you see this is moving it kind of left and right on my viewport. This is going to move it in that direction. As you can see, I'm kind of rotating the camera, so what is left and right is going to change, of course. And of course the blue moves it up and down. Hopefully I didn't ruin my little game design here by doing that. So one thing that's really important to understand about the Unreal Engine is the concept of the details panel. So the details panel in the default layout is going to usually be here, this column on the right. Sometimes you do see this world settings tab. So if you're not seeing the details panel, make sure that it's not the world settings tab selected. The details panel is what you want. So the purpose of the details panel is to show you everything you need to know about the individual objects that you're selecting. And you can kind of see how, as I click on different objects, as I'm left clicking on these, it's actually changing these properties here, because this is a cube. I know it doesn't look like a cube, but it's because I've stretched it. I'll show you how to do that later. So this is a cube, and it has these properties, okay, in the details tab. Now, it's going to have a bunch of stuff that you typically don't need to care about. So a lot of these things that you're seeing here, this is a lot of information. You're seeing LOD, ray tracing, texture streaming, all these things. You typically don't need to worry about a lot of that stuff. Usually the stuff you need to understand in the details panel are the things that are in the top areas of the details panel. Now, the good news is, if you're ever needing to find something very specific, though, you do have a search bar here, and it's very easy. Like, let's say I wanted to find static mesh. I could just type that, and you can see it's going to find that for me. So that's very handy. One pro tip, though, when you do use this, make sure that you do clear the field. Otherwise, you're going to look at this and be like, why am I only getting this, right? That's because you haven't cleared the search field. So that's a common mistake that I see students make all the time. So that's your details panel. Every object, and actually not just every object, but just about everything in the Unreal Engine has a details panel associated with it. Pretty much anything that's going to have properties is going to have some kind of version of this details panel. The next thing to note here is this in the upper right of my layout. This is the world outliner. So this is a list of all objects that exist in my map, in my level here. So you can see all these various cubes. All right, these are my little platforms. And so this is a way you can see anything that you might have in the map at any given time. All right, and another thing I want to point out here is where our assets are typically located. So we have our content browser or content drawer. Now, if you've just opened up a project, your content drawer may automatically collapse. That's very common. That's a default setting. So if your content drawer collapses, you may want to click on this thing called Dock in Layout, which is going to keep it up all the time. And that's what I prefer, actually. I actually prefer to keep my content drawer always up because I'm constantly needing to look for assets and things. So just be aware of that by default, the content drawer is going to collapse until you mouse over it. So just be aware of that. And so you can see here, all these folders represent all of the assets in your game project. Now, as you've opened up a fresh project, you're going to have less than I have. This is everything from the example game in the textbook. So you can see that I already have various assets in here that you're probably not going to have in yours. That's fine. So this is where everything, all your game assets are going to be kept. So you can keep that in mind as well. So our goal of this game jam is to make a basic third-person platformer, and whenever I teach Unreal for the first time, I love doing this because what's really awesome is that we don't actually need to do any programming, any scripting, anything difficult, because when we open a third-person project template, we get everything that we need for basic platforming gameplay. I'll show you what I mean. I'll click on this play button here, which is how you do what's called a editor preview or play in editor. It allows you to kind of preview the game. And here's our character. Now, I'm going to have some footstep sounds. That's associated with one of our chapters on audio, so you're not going to have those footstep sounds yet. Okay, otherwise, all of this will be the same for you. And again, if you play PC games, you're going to be very familiar with how this works. So WASD does control the character. W makes the character move backward, forward rather, S backward, A left, D right, and spacebar is your jump. So again, this is going to be very standard stuff if you play PC games. And then the mouse is going to move the third-person camera around. So as I'm moving the mouse, I'm changing my view here. And so what's awesome about this is without any programming at all, we already have a very simple third-person platformer game. So again, if you're not familiar with that genre, that would be games like Mario 64, things like that. So a game where you have a character in third person and you're basically jumping through obstacles and things like this. Now, when you have your example map, you're not going to have much gameplay, right? So let's talk about how to modify our gameplay. This is part of our game jam. We're trying to make an interesting platformer, and certainly we're going to need these, the actual platforms. And so what did I do to make those? So you're going to go into this button here, the quickly add to project button, and you're going to click that, left click that, and you're going to go to place actors, and then you're going to look for shapes and then a cube. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go ahead and go to quickly add to project, shapes, and cube, and we get this cube here, right? So okay, cool. And nice thing about this cube is we can jump on it. In fact, I'll show you that. Click on the play button here, and if you jump, you can jump right on top of this thing. Now if we wanted to in our game design, we can just use this. We can just keep dropping these cubes, but that's going to be not great game design, right? Notice how I have these cubes. They're not really cubes anymore. They're actually platforms. How do we take this and make it into that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to left click on this and we're going to hit the space bar. All right, and you notice when I hit the space bar how the tool changes. You can kind of see these icons light up here in the viewport. These have different functions. The one that we want to make our platforms is this one right here. This is called the non-uniform scaling tool. So what's going to happen is if I mouse over the blue and I hold down my left mouse button and then move my mouse up and down, notice what happens, right? It changes the shape along that dimension. All right, so if I then click on this handle, it's going to change the shape in that dimension. All right, and so now you can see we can make a platform. That's pretty rad. It's pretty awesome. So now we have a game platform, not just a little cube here. Now what we can do once we have a platform is we can actually start to duplicate these. Now you could, if you wanted, just keep on dropping in cubes exactly like we did to get the first one. I'll quickly add the project, go into shapes and cube, okay? But that's actually not necessary. Once you place the first one, all you have to do is good old Control-C, Control-V, or just copy and paste, okay? So there's lots of different ways to copy and paste within Unreal. You can actually go Control-C, Control-V, and notice how it's not immediately apparent that you made a copy. It's because it's going to hide it. This object is literally stacked right on top of the other object. Remember, these are game objects, so they're not going to obey the same kind of laws of physics that a real object would have, right? So the fact that it actually makes sense in the game world, you can have two solid things intersecting each other like that. So that's just a gameism, so to speak. But once you click on this and lift it up, you can see that we've made a new object just by doing Control-C, Control-V. You can also go into Edit, Copy, and Paste, just like any program. But let me tell you, as a longtime user of Unreal Engine, I've been using Unreal Engine since 2006. Okay, it's 2024 now. It's kind of hard to believe that. What I like to do is this. This is kind of like my little trick. This is a keyboard shortcut. If I hold down the Alt key, the left Alt key on the keyboard, and then I left click and drag one of these widget handles, guess what happens? I make a copy. I really like this if I want to make a lot of copies really quickly, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go ahead and make these copies here, and you can see, wow, look at all these copies of platforms. And so what you can do now is start to make your platforming course, all right, which is what I've done here. And so let me go ahead and explain kind of what my design is. All right, so I game jammed this myself, so I just went ahead and did it really quickly. All right, now you might be wondering how you can get these little text things here to appear. Just so you know, if you go into quickly add, all right, and you go to all classes here, this is just going to show you everything you can possibly place. What you're looking for, if you scroll down, I'm just using the middle mouse wheel to scroll down here. What we can do is find the text render actor. That's what that is. Now, this is a, I guess, more slightly advanced lesson, but I placed a new one, and you can see it just says text, right? If I go to its details panel, remember every object in the world has a details panel here. If I find the text property here, I can actually change what that is. I can say, in this case, hello world, and there it is. So that's how I got these kind of signs in the game. I'll go ahead and delete this one because I don't need it. And so that, again, without doing any programming, all right, I have my starting point. I have some game direction, get to the goal without falling, and you can see I've built a platforming obstacle course. All right, and I even have something like an alternative path here, right? So here's our goal. Okay, our goal is this area here. All right. And the goal is to make it all the way there without falling. Let's go ahead and try my own game. I know you're making your own game. Hopefully you're having a lot of fun placing platforms. So let's go ahead and try mine, though. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump. All right, and I'm going to warn you, I'm actually a very poor player when it comes to platformers. You can see that. I just fly right past that platform there. You know, I'm more of an RPG player in my gaming life, so I'm not going to do particularly well, I think, especially because I know where it gets difficult. I have a rather unreasonable difficulty curve, I would say. That's some game design talk. That is, I want a gradual sort of difficulty curve, and this is probably a little tricky. This jump here is probably a little too hard, and so this one too, because you barely make it. So these would be items that we talk about perhaps improving in the next chapter, where we take our Game Jam games and apply some game design principles to them. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and continue on here, jumping. Let's see if I can make it all the way, if I'm going to fall. All right, just being very careful here. Here's some kind of lower platform. I'm going to try to skip that, go right to this one. Okay, here we go. Doing well so far. This one's going to be kind of a tricky jump. Oh, just barely made it. Oh, almost fell. It's amazing how much fun this simple game design can be, right? Like, get your friends to try this. Absolutely get your friends to try this and see how well they do, and see if you might want to make any adjustments based on how they do. That kind of playtesting is very valuable. Okay. Almost there. Almost there. And I made it. I'm actually shocked. I'm going to be completely honest. I was not expecting to actually win. I'm usually very bad at platforming, especially when I'm trying to record a video of it. I'm pleasantly surprised I made it all the way to the end. But I do want to show you what happens if I fail. So I'm going to go ahead and jump here and allow myself to fall. Notice what happens. Okay, notice poof. Now I still have to hit escape. The player just disappeared. This is a very, very primitive version of game over that you can do. It's not really how a commercial game would do game over. You would actually, go into some sort of game over screen and get options to restart. But for our little game jam, it's, I think, perfectly fine. I'm using something in the world settings, which may be right here next to your details panel. If it's not, if you click on the cog in the upper right, you will see world settings, and you can go ahead and get it to it that way. And what you're looking for is a particular setting called the kill Z. All right, so I'm just going to search for it and kill Z. So the kill Z is basically like how far does the player fall before they're automatically killed, right? And I put negative 200 because basically what that means is this. It means that when the player jumps and falls out of the world, they get about this far, right, or so before they actually get killed like that, more or less. Really what's happening is the player character blueprint is getting deleted, basically. You notice the game world persists and everything. So like I said, it's a very, very primitive version of game over, but good enough for our game jam. All right, finally, to conclude this lesson, let me give you some design tips as you're game jamming your third-person platformer. So you want to begin with easy jumps. Ease the player into it. That's a very typical game design essential, is that you don't typically want to make something hard immediately for a player. You want the player to have the opportunity to learn the game and get comfortable with the controls. And you notice in my example, I actually do that. I actually start with some really easy jumps. And actually, it's not even possible to fall in the early part of the game because it's just kind of contained within that box. Now, I do kind of have that, I think, unreasonably tiny platform there early on. That's certainly a game design change I might make here. So that's another thing you might want to do, though, is experiment with different size platforms, tiny platforms that require precision jumps. Have fun with this. This should be fun. And again, the kill Z settings, you can go ahead and change those in the world properties in order to have a very simple sort of game over state that occurs. And also consider interesting choices. Now, you may have seen in my example where I do have an alternative path, a different set of platforms that you can go so the player has a little bit of choice. That's often a very good idea, is to give players choice if you can. Now, just in case you wanted to try publishing the game, it's a little bit advanced to be able to do that, but it's also not particularly difficult. You're going to find that Platforms button in Unreal, and you're going to select Windows and Package Project. This is assuming you want to do a Windows PC build, which most of the time, especially when you're beginning in this, is what you're going to do. What's going to happen is you're going to get a .exe file. It's going to be the project name .exe. Now, there's some other stuff. Sometimes students make this mistake where they think they can just distribute that .exe file only. That's not true. Those other folders that come with it all have to be there. It's going to be contained in a folder named Windows. So in case you did want to actually make this little project playable without having to install the Unreal Engine and do a play in editor, that's how you can do that. Okay, that's it for Chapter 1. I look forward to seeing you all again for Chapter 2 as we look at modifying our Game Jam game with some game design principles.